Big tech gets political. Facebook announcing it's removing 4 pages belonging to Alex Jones for, quote, violating our hate speech and bullying policies. This follows Apple's move to erase Alex Jones' InfoWars podcast from its iTunes library. Then on to Twitter, suspending conservative commentator Candace Owens for her response to a set of anti-white tweets by a New York Times editorial board member. The social media site Twitter later issuing an apology, but never once taking aim at the New York Times staffer for the original tweet. Joining me now, Jessica Tarloff, Fox News contributor, and Matt Brainerd, Republican strategist, former Trump campaign data and strategy director, and Look Ahead America executive director. Jessica, let me start with you. Again, if you notice, I've noticed on Twitter just in the last couple of weeks that all the Trump supporters have a big red X next to their name to basically highlight what they see as censorship of conservative content on Twitter.
I've noticed that, too. It took me a couple days to figure out what the X's meant.
But again, it does make a statement.
Oh, it definitely does. And like Dem socialists with the wilting flower, it's interesting when you see these trends happen like that. I think it's a very serious issue that we certainly should be talking about. I think there's a difference between what went on with Alex Jones and what went on with Candace Owens here. They certainly made a mistake, and obviously their algorithms picked up what Candace was doing, and she was making a point that I think does need to be made about Sarah Jeong's tweets, which apparently go back to 2012 even. It wasn't just the latest rash. As for Alex Jones, and I don't know if you saw last week that he's actually suing parents whose child died in Sandy Hook for $100,000 to help him cover legal fees. That family was forced to move 6 or 7 times because of the fact that Alex Jones was not only spreading lies about them, he said that they were child actors there, but releasing information as to where they live. So they haven't been safe, and they've been moving with their daughter, who's the same age. She was a twin with their son that died. So there's a little bit of a difference there.
And I think that very often when you see companies shutting down a podcast like with Apple and what Facebook did, Matt, it's they're covering their you-know-whats because of legal liability in some instances. That's my go-to thought. But I will say, in terms of the treatment of conservatives, broadly speaking, looking at the Candace Owens situation, it actually fuels the Trump base because they do feel like they're being silenced. And it actually makes them more. I was talking to Lee Carter, and Lee's going to get into this as the show moves on. But you look at she was testing these rallies, and people are more devoted to Trump than ever before. What say you, Matt?
Yeah, I think the real question here is, like, who's going to be next? Because at least in Alex Jones's case, the language that they used was that, it was hate speech. And that's a very broad term, and it's not really clear on any given day what that means to these tech companies. It's important to remember that personnel is policy, and stacked from the bottom to the top of the corporate leadership, department heads of all these tech companies, they are hardcore leftists. And if this is just the first example of them censoring somebody or going after somebody, it just makes me wonder who's next, whose unfavorable opinions will be targeted next for deplatforming by Apple or any one of these larger, other large social media companies. Will it be people who oppose illegal immigration or question the latest on gender politics or pro-lifers? I mean, at what point does it cross that quote-unquote hate speech line, especially when they're relying on far-left organizations like the Southern Poverty Law Center to define exactly what hate speech is, which would include this network here?
Well, Matt, what I'm saying is that actually that the outrage at these social media sites is actually somehow in an upside-down world. It works to the candidate's benefit. It works to President Trump's benefit. The laziness of many people in television media, because it's easier to accuse President Trump of having lost his mind or being deranged or being mentally ill than to actually do policy work and understand, say, his trade policy. What I'm saying is the outrage generated by these social media platforms in trying to censor conservatives, it actually whips up the base.
I would concede that there is definitely some pushback, and when these stories come out, it certainly does make people much more skeptical of these large hegemonies of tech. But it does concern us, though, that they are essentially removing the platform in many cases of funding, in the cases of Google for removing advertising options for right-wing conservative voices, patriotic voices, along with just deleting podcasts wholesale, not particular ones, but the entire podcast series of Alex Jones. And not to defend him, but it is a troubling sign, is that there's no appeal when Facebook or Twitter takes away your account or blocks you. There's no remedy to. You're just stuck with it, and because they have such dominance.
With a podcast, you can deliver your own podcast, and you can still download. Like, there are myriad podcast apps that you can use to listen to a podcast. It doesn't. It might, being on Apple's platform, it does generate listeners, but I just want to make that point that if you can put it up on a website and people can listen to and watch what you put out there, because, quite frankly, of the First Amendment.